Hi, this is Rajiv and welcome to Word in Brief. For today's meditation, I want to take you to Isaiah chapter 43 verses 18 and 19. God speaks to us there and he says, "Forget the former things. Do not dwell on the past. See, I'm doing a new thing. It springs forth. Do you not perceive it? I'm making a way in the wilderness and streams in the desert." Now, this is a powerful promise. This is a very relevant promise. And I say it's relevant because if you just rewind to maybe 60, 70, 80 days from where we are today, before this whole pandemic situation happened, life was very different. And we tend to hold on to the past. We tend to hold on to how things were before. And I think God seems to be speaking to us and he says, hey, you know what? I want you to forget the former things. Don't dwell on the past. This promise is so counterintuitive, so opposite to so many other scriptures that we see in the Bible, where we are reminded time and time again, don't forget. Don't forget your blessings. Don't forget that it's God who gives you the power to gain wealth. Don't forget it's God who makes you successful. Don't forget that it's God who's led you thus far. But God is deliberate here, and I think it's a forget by design. God is specific when he says forget the former things. And he goes on to say, forget the former things and see. I think there's a connection between forgetting and seeing. Only when you choose to forget the former things can you see the new thing. I look at Joseph in the Bible. You see, Joseph had such a tough past. But you know what he named his first son? He named his first son Manasseh. Manasseh means to forget. And I think Joseph was kind of reminded of this principle. And I think he was operating from that principle. And the principle was, unless I choose to forget my past, I cannot gain a perspective of what God is doing in my life. I can't gain a perspective or identify the new things that God is doing in my life. And I think we need to embrace that principle. Choose to forget the past, the season that's over, and recognize the new things that God is doing for you right now. And God says, I'm doing a new thing. You see, and our human mind is so logical. We expect things to work out in a certain way before we can recognize an opportunity. But with God, it's very different. God works from the perspective of supernatural, and he uses situations of ruins and hopelessness as an ideal stage to perform some of his greatest work. Take Nehemiah, for example, right? God used Nehemiah to transform a situation of ruins to significance. You take Joseph, for example, a situation of being a slave to becoming a savior of the hungry. You take Gideon. He was a coward hiding in the cave, and God made him captain courageous, and he won that battle over all the enemies. So you always see God uses these hopeless situations and he does his greatest work there. As you continue to read that passage, I want to encourage you, don't be so stuck with the hopelessness of the situation that you're not able to recognize and see the new things that God is doing for you. And that's precisely what God speaks. He says, do you not perceive? Do you not perceive it springs forth? And I want to just focus on the word perceive here. Perceive means to identify proof without tangibility, right? Evidence without it being tangible. And that's the definition of faith, isn't it? In Hebrews chapter 11 and verse 1, where we are told that faith is the evidence of things not seen and the substance of things hoped for. My question to you is, do you recognize, do you perceive, even though there's no tangible evidence of what God is doing in your life? Do you recognize the direction that he's moving you in? Do you recognize the people that he's bringing into your life? Do you recognize what he's been whispering in your spirit, right? Don't just get so caught with the hopelessness of the situation that you do not recognize what God is doing for you. Next he says, I make a way for you in the wilderness. Wilderness in my mind's eye is just acres and acres or miles and miles of desert sand. Just everywhere you look, it's nothingness and desert sand. And our situation seems like that, doesn't it? This whole lockdown and pandemic, and it seems like we are in a state of nothingness. We seem to be asking ourselves, how can this be? How can a promotion happen right now? How can this new job happen? How can the marriage happen? How can this be? The situation seems like a wilderness, but God says, I'm going to make a way in the wilderness, a way where there seems to be no way. Remember, Moses had his encounter in the middle of the wilderness. In the middle of nothingness, Moses had his encounter with God, which is the burning bush experience. And his life changed ever since he had that encounter. I want to tell you, look out for that encounter with God in the midst of this wilderness that you find yourself in, because God says, I'm going to make a way in the wilderness. And finally, he says, I'm going to make streams in the desert. Streams speak about refreshing. Streams talk about a new season. Streams bring in new growth. And God says, you know what? In the desert-like situation, in the hopeless situation, the streams of God are going to flow and going to refresh and going to usher in a new season. I want to encourage you. Don't be discouraged in the midst of this hopelessness, but instead remember to forget. Remember to forget. Forget the former things. God's doing a new thing in your life. Recognize the new thing. Perceive it, even though there's no tangible evidence. Thank you for watching. There's just one thing I want you to do for me, which is visit my YouTube channel and click on the subscribe button, and you'll get a lot of good content which will encourage you. God bless you.